Going to ask the first question. We've talked a little bit about Hudson Yards today. Obviously, it's the big real estate event of the year. What do you see as a spillover effect of that in the Chelsea market? Michael, you have a project in Chelsea. MaryAnne, you're planning one in Chelsea. And what do you make of how it's been received so far? It's gotten kind of lambasted by the critics, but what's your take?
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Look, Hudson Yards is an example of a rare moment in New York City history when an entire neighborhood could be created. And kudos to Related and everyone involved. It's an enormous undertaking and will be, no doubt, a tremendous success. I think what it signals is kind of a go west mentality. And we're obviously seeing the migration of the office talent going west as well as the West Side become a hot location for residents. I think the implications are far-reaching, and I think they reach as far as Jersey. I think this is an interesting opportunity for land in Jersey City and Hoboken, which has already been on the upswing, but for places that maybe have been compression markets. If you work that far west and you're going to work every day over at Hudson Yards, the notion of going back to the East Side to live is certainly not as appealing as hopping on a ferry and going to Jersey. So I think that there are implications that go far beyond New York City because it is such an incredible critical mass. For us, building on 28th Street, a mid-block site, it represents an opportunity to build a special and different kind of rental product. Obviously, building rental is near impossible in a location like West Chelsea. The land is priced for highest and best use, which is condos. We had the unique ability to create a ground lease, and therefore we're putting over 400 units across from FIT at a location where people are pining to live there, but new rental product will be very, very hard to come by. And so we have very limited availability over the next few years. So we're excited about the fact that we're building a building that won't look anything like the towers at Hudson Yards. It'll offer a very different premium rental product, and we think that there'll be, we're tapping into demand where it's so latent and so incredible that the building will be a home run.
Right. Michael, so your project, the Getty, it's 4 or 5 blocks away from Hudson Yards. You're selling, $40 and $50 million units, the opposite end of the spectrum. How does Hudson Yards figure into your marketing of the project and that sort of thing?
First thing, thank you for having all of us here. As usual, great turnout for you guys. West Chelsea has been a neighborhood that is kind of a phenomenal situation because really the High Line is what originally made West Chelsea what it is. We've been seeing great architects come to West Chelsea for the past 10 years, and Hudson Yards really is the end of that process. I think that when you talk about the implication of Hudson Yards, and I'm in total agreement, these are implications that go throughout the city, but at different levels, right? So for me, the only time that I've seen, in essence, a neighborhood grow out of the ground is when we did work in the Middle East, and you'd get somebody say, okay, I want to build a neighborhood here, but that was in the middle of the desert. It was not in New York City where you actually had to go and get, normal permits and build, sensible buildings. The Hudson Yards as a whole, I think, is a fantastic development, and of course, there's always, you said, this criticism. I don't think there's a single person that would not want to be in the seat of Steve Ross owning that property. Nobody knows how much money they made or didn't make, but the undertaking was huge, and the result is amazing. As far as West Chelsea, for us, you talk about the Getty. The Getty is the billionaire's building of West Chelsea. Every single buyer in that building is a billionaire. Today, these guys actually, in a step, can walk around the corner and get to have every restaurant and every shop. That's something we didn't have, 3, 4, 5 years ago, or 3 years ago when we bought the property. If you're asked, I think that it's a huge upside for West Chelsea, but it's a huge upside for the entire West Side, and I agree. The issue with Hudson Yards, I just want to finish with this, access is not great. We all know that. But I think that is exactly what you were saying, and I support that. People are going to want to live closer to Hudson Yards because the massive employment there is going to drive real estate in that neighborhood.
And Vishaan, what do you think? I mean, Hudson Yards is such a departure because it's basically creating a master planned community when that's not the typical thing in New York. New Yorkers are used to the city growing organically, parcel by parcel. Is this the new New York? Is this kind of an aberration. What do you make of what this says about the city?
Well, again, thank you for having us all. You know, I would actually respectfully disagree. New York City has had, you know, from Rockefeller Center to Columbia University to West End Avenue, like things that we just take for granted were planned. Hudson Yards and the High Line, Michael mentioned, you know, that was all planned in the early stages of the Bloomberg administration after 9/11. It came out of Senator Schumer's report that asked for much more commercial space in the city. It was trying to address a certain demand that we knew that we had. The High Line, it's funny, being part of the original planning team for the High Line, people all thought we were crazy. People said, you know, no one will go up there. People will get raped and killed up there. It had 6.5 million visitors last year, more than the Statue of Liberty. And so I actually think that now that we're planning into new sort of frontiers and thinking about new parts of the city, as people have skepticism about those new parts and say, well, how's that going to work? How does that pencil? None of it penciled when we first started thinking about these things. So it's always important to be forward thinking.
Right. What do you make of the High Line area today? I mean, on the development front, it's basically, you know, a Starkitect condo canyon at this point. Was that kind of what you envisioned? And also, I'm just curious about...
So, you know, it's interesting. When the High Line was planned, it was planned with about 30% affordable housing on the bet that most of the development around the High Line would be rental. No one in 2002 or 2003 was sitting there believing that there'd be this huge condo market that would emerge around the High Line. It was far from the subway. It wasn't, you know, particularly close to anything. And yet things changed. At the federal level, it was quantitative easing. A lot of people entered the real estate market that hadn't been there before. And so we ended up with way more condos than anyone in the administration expected, which had both good aspects and bad aspects to it, I would argue.
Are you guys seeing, I think it's pretty somewhat documented that there's a large supply of condos on the High Line. Michael, is that something you find yourself competing with? And Elizabeth Ann, do you see buyers, you know, spoiled for choice in that area right now?
Well, I mean, I think, well, thank you to Michael for building an amazing building, because I think I lived for 16 years in West Chelsea, so I'm pretty partial to it, although I've moved to Dumbo. The provenance and the amount of attention to that neighborhood, especially when you see groundbreaking properties open, has just made it such a destination. And I think although Hudson Yards has helped, I think it was already there. I think this desire to live in the coolest, hippest, and like architecturally incredibly diverse neighborhood has been there. I mean, I think we have incredible architecture in New York, but we don't have it as you'll see in like Valencia, Spain, or London, who have these incredibly different concepts going on. And the High Line area is like the one place you've actually seen that come to fruition, and I think that's been a big draw as well.
Michael, do you see yourself competing against the other condo projects along the High Line?
Well, again, I think you're familiar with the Getty. The Getty is probably it's the highest pricing building in West Chelsea at over $5,000 foot average for a 10-story building. It is a unique building. Every unit there is different. I don't think we're competing with anybody, but this is a bigger philosophy. I mean, we know each other for many years, and you know, I'll say today what I said 15 years ago. The idea of developing any product, if it's office, if it's residential, if it's commercial, if you don't develop something that's unique and different, you're just a victim of the ups and downs in the markets. So, you know, it's great that we have Hudson Yards, and I think it's a plus, and it's a huge plus. But we've sold the units at the Getty at record-setting prices way before Hudson Yards opened. I mean, it was a construction site. So remember, we sold this 2-3 years ago, and they just closed recently when we completed the building. So I think that, you know, also the product developed at Hudson Yards is very different from West Chelsea.
I think it also gets this idea of the idea of commoditized building and building in mass versus specialized product, and that's in the rental market as well. It's a very different feeling to be in a low-rise mid-block in Chelsea than it is to be on the far west side. Even on the commercial space, we bought the Terminal Warehouse building on 28th Street. That's a modern intervention of a 1 million square foot fortress, if you will, a beautiful space that has enormous potential to bring the old with the new. And as a commercial opportunity, there are technology tenants and tenants in the innovation economy who are going to gravitate toward the unique and special nature of a terminal warehouse building over a skyscraper. And that's the beauty of New York.
Right, and to add to that, so Related has these great buildings that they're building in Hudson Yards, but I don't think there's any competition, because if you want to live on the 50th floor, you're not living on the 5th floor. It's a different type of buyer, it's a different set of requirements. So Hudson Yards as a whole does not really compete with West Chelsea as a, kind of a general neighborhood.
It's a different product. MaryAnne, I want to ask you, and I want to ask the group as well, obviously Amazon pulled out. MaryAnne, you have a 1 million square foot development site in Long Island City. Was that a deal that was inked pre-Amazon, in the middle of Amazon? And what are kind of the plans there, and what do you see about the overall outlook for Long Island City going forward?
So let me start by saying what Amazon did for Queens cannot be taken away, which is they picked Queens. And they picked Queens as a place where technology and talent and real estate come together and create amazing opportunity and upside. And so I'm a big believer on the waterfront in Queens. Obviously, the development site that I'm partnering on, we shook hands on Valentine's Day, which is the day that Amazon pulled out. And I would say that I'm as much a believer today as I was then. I don't think Amazon left New York City. Amazon's going to have to figure out another way to come to New York because they need to be here. And so the beauty of, look, the whole thing was a debacle on so many levels, and we could probably have an entire panel on the post-mortem of what could have been different with respect to the Amazon deal, having been involved in large-scale, controversial, mixed-use private partnerships. I have a lot of thinking on that, but I think as it relates to the waterfront in Queens, it's a call to action. The city is open for business, Queens is open for business, and the government ought to stand up and do the heavy lifting and make it clear that a comprehensive waterfront plan for Queens on the waterfront is long overdue, and that there is a plan out there that can work not just for the users and the developers and the politicians, but for the community themselves. The fact is the community wants what all of us should want, which is access to the waterfront, the ability to have parks, open space, and community facilities. And there's so much real estate. This is 48 acres. It's hard for me to imagine that there can't be a comprehensive effort that works on every level for most New Yorkers.
You mentioned that you had the handshake on the deal the day Amazon departed. What sequence of events happened there? What did Amazon announce, and then you did the deal that day, or you did the deal and then Amazon? No,
I was 100% in, with or without Amazon. I do feel for the people in Queens, restaurants who undertook renovation plans, developers who put Amazon in their collateral material for their real estate. I mean, a lot of people got way, way, way out over their skis. I just think I've been beat up enough in this business to know that it's not real until it's actually signed. But the fact is, the good news is that Queens was picked after a very, very deep dive and lots of due diligence, and those fundamentals don't change just because Amazon decided to take their marbles and go home.
And if you look at Long Island City today, you have, 15 towers when you had one tower 10 years ago, right? Vishaan, what do you see as far as the future of Long Island City, and also, since it's right next door, Sunnyside Yards, like we mentioned before, we're talking about, 180 acres? Is that, where does that fit in on your time horizon? Where do you think that fits into the future of New York if you had to look way forward?
Well, so our client is the City of New York, and we're planning for Sunnyside Yard, which is a 180-acre rail yard. It's owned by the MTA and Amtrak. It is right next to the Long Island City core. It's very well served by mass transit. And when you have 180 acres to work with and you're thinking about a 30, 40, 50, 70-year plan, you can really think about the future and especially how technology plays out, autonomous vehicles, other things that, how you do things like trash collection, just basic quality of life for people that you don't have in other parts of the city, I think is a very interesting thing. I just know on the Amazon thing, because obviously we thought about it during Sunnyside, I think it was really a shame what happened. But I agree with MaryAnne. I think the fundamentals of Queens are incredibly strong. And I also think we would ignore all of the critics at our peril. In other words, there are NIMBY groups out there that were saying and doing horrible things, lying about the deal, et cetera, and that scared Amazon away. But there are also people raising legitimate concerns about the fact that the subways are congested. There's a lot of infrastructure problems in Queens. There's a lot of infrastructure problems in our city. And if everyone wants to ignore that and just keep building, we do that at our peril, right? You know, I know everyone wants to make money and all, but like, if we ignore the basic needs of the city, it's going to come and get every one of your businesses, right? And so it's really important that we start separating the NIMBY stuff from the legitimate problems that people are having on the ground in New York City. And like, we really saw that play out.
Michael, what do you think about it? Or MaryAnne, Scott Reckler was saying, you know, this is the toughest political climate he's seen in the city in all the years he's been in business. Or Elizabeth Ann, what do you think about that?
I'm sorry, about the what?
The toughest political climate.
You know, I can tell you that the one thing I believe in is I can't control things that I can't control. So my investment strategy has always been to invest and develop properties that really have no true connection or effect to the political climate.
You're an as-of-right guy.
I'm not only that I'm an as-of-right guy, but you know, I'm also a super prime guy. So we bought a building on 5th Avenue and 54th Street. We own 3 acres on the beach on 18 and Collins, or we just closed on a property in the center of Beverly Hills. It doesn't matter what happens because we're at the bullseye of every one of the market, and we're appealing to a very specific customer. I don't know, and I'm not smart enough to tell you what happened with Amazon or didn't happen to Amazon, and in counting on things that you can't control with billions of dollars that we have out there, to me, is insane. This is part of the reason that we only develop as-of-right properties, because you can't put out those amounts of money without having certainty, at least not for myself and not for our partners. So the Amazon thing didn't, you know, I think it's unfortunate because I think it seemed like it would have been a great thing and for New York City as a whole. But, you know, this is New York City at the end of the day. We are the center of the world. We are very critical of ourselves. So we'll walk out the street and we'll say, that side of the block is bad, that side of the block is better. We're extremely critical of ourselves here. This is just the nature of who we are. You know, we have partners. Our partners are German pension funds and really a lot of European money. New York City is a spot on the map. Okay, this is the center of the world, and we forget that because we're very much all obsessed with our kind of ourself here. But when you step outside New York, people look at us as at a very different eye that we look at ourselves.
One thing I want to ask about too, you know, I think so much of the story of Manhattan real estate over the last 20 years has been the West Side. If you look at, you know, back when Tribeca was developed, to the Meatpacking, to Chelsea, to Hudson Yards, Time Warner Center, you know, Riverside, South, that whole thing. At the same time, on the East Side, very little development. Do you see that, some of the panels we're talking about earlier today, that changing? When do you see that reaching a critical mass? MaryAnne, I know, you know, your partners in L&L Mag are working on a Park Avenue skyscraper, which I think was the first one in 50 years. Do you see more critical mass, more projects making sense on the East Side?
I do think that on the commercial front with Midtown rezoning, you're going to see a new generation of office buildings that are high-performing 21st century buildings. With the average age of our office stock approaching 70 years, we have to do that. And I think there may then be, in the next leasing cycle, 20 years and beyond, a migration back east or an ability for the city to stay and keep it standing as a global economy, because if we don't change the nature of the office stock, we're not going to be able to keep up internationally. If you travel around the world and you see what's built, it really, a lot of what's in New York needs to be brought up to the modern era. But I would say that I'd ask Elizabeth, just because, you know, we say people are moving to the Upper East Side so they can save money to afford to live in Brooklyn. And so the question becomes, is it over, you know, in the East Side? Is that where the value proposition lie in rental and in residential generally? Like, what is the future? I guess I think the future of the East Side from a commercial point of view, with JP Morgan's decision, 425 Park Avenue, a lot of exciting things, I think, on the commercial front. But I wonder what you would say about the residential.
Well, I think you have to look at it. I mean, we're like, I say we have a quadricated market here, you know, co-ops, condos, rentals, then new development, then add like super luxury prime. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a bargain, I think the best value play right now is a co-op on the Upper East Side. I mean, I was looking at something in the 80s on Park that probably 5 years ago would have traded for about 9.5, and one that needs work is asking 6.7 now. That's a bargain. That's a 10-room apartment. But I think you have to factor in that there's so much more land, or was more land to build on the west side. The Upper East Side was, or no, the Upper East Side, that whole corridor was your original sort of apartment stock of New York City. So it wasn't like there were opportunities. But I think if you look, I mean, on the far side by First Avenue, there's some really big plots going up right now, the solo plots. There's some very interesting stuff we have coming on the Upper East Side, and they're going to be asking very large price per square foot, and they will get them because that's such a rarity. But yeah, I think the East Side is a bargain.
I guess you have a complicating thing too in terms of development because, you know, just like with the L&L skyscraper on Park, you have to tear down a building and to put a new one up. Same thing on the Upper East Side. If you want to build new development, you could have a sliver, you build 20 units, you can't really do major things, and that, if you factor that into the cost, it seems like it gets pretty difficult pretty quick.
Speaking of as of right, there's nothing as of right or easy on the Upper East Side when it comes to building tall residential in those communities. It's a tall order.
Well,
Michael-
part of the problem is that the product is dated. So you're talking about 420, right? You're building on Park Avenue. There's this whole idea of that Midtown is basically evaporating the Hudson Yards, which is somewhat nonsense because at the end of the day, all these tenants have moved to Hudson Yards, or a lot of them, for a simple reason. It's great new office product. There is no great new office product in Midtown, right? I mean, there's 425 Park, end of story. And obviously 425 Park is a massive, crazy undertaking, stripping the building, building the building, because it's the only way to do it. You know, if you guys waited a bit, you could have done it in a different way, obviously, but who knew that there would be a change in the zoning there? I can tell you that on the office side, there's a massive opportunity on development right now. So, I think the part of what we do is, as you say, it's as of right, and try to really focus on innovative product. We are actually about to start an office product, and build a new ground-up office building in Midtown, because there is just absolutely no competition. There is no great office product. And in the next few years, you'll see a huge migration out of those offices. So the opportunities, when you talk about East Side or West Side, you have to look at what's on the ground today. And we're dealing with a tremendous amount of old product.
Right. I'm sorry, you're saying that was a project that you're going to be doing?
The what?
You're going to be doing an office project?
Yes.
Oh, nice. Location?
Come on, Stuart.
We'll read about it in the Real Deal later.
Well,
But I do want to ask about...
I'll read about it in the Real Deal before I start, because that's normally
That's
how
what
I
you told
found
me.
out the news.
We see when it hits public records, that's how we get it. But I had a question about 685 Fifth, which is a project you're working on in Midtown. So that's an office building. You're converting part of it to residential condos. Why do that with the current condo market? How does the economics pencil out? And you're also adding 5 stories on top, right?
Yeah, so we're actually adding 7 stories on top. But let's put the current condo market on the side. We can have a whole panel of what that word means, current condo market. I'm happy to address that, and there's people here that could address that probably as good as I am, if not better.
Tell me what you think the public perception of the condo market is and what you think it is.
Okay. So I'm sorry that I have to read this. I'm getting old. I can't see so well. November 2006, the Real Deal panel. More than 1,100 people attended the early March forum at the Cooper Union in East Village. Right?
I remember it.
Listen to this. New residential development in the 5 boroughs is ebbing among concerns over a housing market slowdown and rising construction costs. But don't expect a drastic drop-off in fresh construction. That is, after all, New York City, where housing still sells for more than $1,000 a foot.
Right.
$1,000 a foot. And you guys were saying, well, market's going down, the world's over. I can give you
markets do go in cycles, though.
So I can continue reading this, and we've done this last time, and I'm happy to read to read the rest of it. But I've said this in 2006. I said this in 2016, and I'm telling you this today. The idea of looking at a market as this up and down is really not relevant, at least to what we do. And the reason that we do what we do is because I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night and have these nightmares if the market's going up and down. When you look at 685 Fifth Avenue, you're on Fifth Avenue and 54th Street, was an office building. It was Gucci's headquarters. Before that, it was Tom Ford's headquarters. The building was being converted to Mandarin Oriental residences, which is really a product that doesn't exist in New York City, smaller apartments, units that are really geared particularly for pied-à-terre buyers. Now, when you look, your next question is going to ask me, well, Midtown, 57th Street, Billionaires Row, what's the
That
average
was literally my
apartment?
next question.
What's the average price on Billionaires Row? Does anybody know? And what's the average pricing in that neighborhood? I mean, your entry level is probably $10 million and goes up, right? That's more or less 432 Park, 111. Every building there, you're 10 to, 200. That's your price range. Our average price is $4 million. Now, how many studios are available for sale today? Or how many units under 1,000 square foot are available in the Plaza District, steps from Central Park?
And Elizabeth Ann, you're working on a project on 57.
Yeah, I'm talking about, in the hard bullseye there. Does anybody know? Is there any brokers here that can guess how many units?
34.
How many?
34.
In new development, there's one.
Okay.
One. Okay? One apartment under 1,000 square foot in the whole district. Now, if you're a guy from London or from Israel, from Istanbul or Paris that wants to be in New York City, where do you want to be? You want to be in Soho, or you want to be in the heart of New York, which is steps from the park. Now, not everybody wants to spend 10 or 20 or $50 million. The idea is that there is a niche and a hole in the market that we've identified, particularly with 685, is to give people a replacement for a hotel suite at the Plaza or at the Four Seasons. So I'm not, when you talk about the market, I'm not concerned about the market. I'm concerned about the fact that there's a huge demand for a product that we're trying to fill a gap for.
Right. I suppose it's kind of like a herd of gazelles. The whole pack is running, and then the laggards get, cut off, and some people do go into, run into problems. But, $59 million apartment is pretty good proof right there. Vishaan, what do you think of the whole Billionaires Row phenomenon and what it means to the fabric of the city? And
I know people get all exercised about it one way or the other, but to me it seems like, I don't know, how many units are there total on Billionaires Row? How many total units? Of the new buildings, would you guess?
1,000 or 2,000?
Yeah, I was going to guess.
Something like that.
I was going to say
Less?
2,000 units. Right? I was going to say, so 2,000 units in a city of 8.5 million people. I'm not sure how much it means, right? Architecturally, I like some of the buildings more than others, but I'm just not sure how much it means to the overall. And I know people say, oh, well, it's gentrifying the city. What are you gentrifying? Central Park South, right? It just never, it never made any sense to me why people are so exercised about these buildings. But I don't know. I just think there's more interesting and exciting things going on elsewhere.
And Michael, you mentioned this. You thought, I think you meant to say this when you were on the phone earlier, that you thought there was too much focus on where buyers are coming from, because I think there is this narrative, obviously, that we have foreign money coming over and it's hidden behind LLCs, and that should be a concern because who knows where this money came from, and that should be policed.
Well, whatever policing of the money, that has nothing to do with anybody sitting on this panel. This is, this is outside the realm of our pay grade here. But there's always this question that you asked, and you asked it when we spoke last, where are people coming from? It doesn't really matter where they're coming from. It doesn't matter where their passport's coming from. New York City had the record tourism last year. I think it's 60 or 68 million visitors, something within that range. It's the highest amount of visitors ever to New York City. The highest growth is from U.S. It's actually not foreign, it's U.S. And New York City, for us, like I said, it is the center of the world. It's not about if the guy's coming from China or from Turkey it's what their lifestyle is, what they're looking for, how they live, where they eat, where they shop. Because if there's a guy coming from London or a guy coming from Israel, and they both want to be on 54 and Fifth Avenue, then they are your target client as a developer, right? But we're not categorizing people by who issued their passport.
Speaking of, foreign buyers, obviously geopolitical concerns are always an issue in development and obviously in the real estate market overall. The front page news the past couple of days has been tariffs, trade war. What do you think that means for real estate? Have you heard grumblings, people talking about it? What do you think?
We talk so much about the Chinese buyer. I just don't think that buyer has been the prevalent buyer here for many years, but we're really stuck on it. I agree with Michael and a lot of it, what he just said, but I think there's a ton of money coming internally within the U.S. Lest we forget, there are extraordinarily rich people who live in New York City who are buying these products. And economies change globally. So I think that if we're, and again, I'm not a builder, but if I was pegging my entire development on one country buying, that's a failure to me. You have to think, how can I build something that people want to buy, not how can I build something that one specific group wants to buy?
So to that point, I just want to say that when we were building Pacific Park after the recession, the way the arena got built was an investment from a Russian oligarch. The way that Atlantic Yards Pacific Park was saved post-recession was a $40 billion Chinese development company. And when we went to see the chairman of that company, his intention was to build as many condos as possible, for which he felt the Chinese buyers would flock. And we said, well, this is Brooklyn, and it doesn't work that way. It's not the right way to execute on the project. But he wanted one of two projects. He wanted to be on the Upper West Side, or he wanted to be in Brooklyn because he wanted critical mass. And I would say that when you go around the city, if you really look behind the layers of related investments, the fact is there's Canadian money, there's sovereign wealth, there's Chinese investment. So I think that it's a bit of a fiction, and it's naive not to recognize that this city is built by a very diverse pool of capital, the same way that the city is strong by a very diverse community of people. And it's what makes New York great. So to all the points that were made about why that money wants to be here, we should absolutely celebrate it. Their money is green, and there's a tremendous amount of vetting that goes into investments by foreign entities into this country.
Well, I think to that point, why the money is coming here, because it's still considered probably one of the safest places in the world and the safest places to invest. So you look at Europe, which is somewhat of a catastrophe between France and the UK and Turkey, and just things that are happening that are kind of political issues that are rocking kind of the world. And without getting into the politics of the U.S., what you think or don't think of our current kind of political state here, there is huge amount of money still coming here. And we've seen the waves from the Chinese, and we've seen from the Russians and from the Arabs, and there's always this cycle of where money is coming from.
Right.
But money never stopped coming here. And it's affected by what happens locally in these countries, and I'm talking mostly, as MaryAnne said, where it's coming, what happens in money that's coming into investment for developments.
And tariffs, on the issue of tariffs, so you think about the life cycle of a development project, ground up, you're talking about 24, 36, 42 months. And so when we became partners with Greenland, it opened up a whole array of global purchasing that we had never experienced before. So the positive is that when you bring in foreign partners, you also bring in the global economy and an ability to leverage off of the work that's happening outside of the U.S. It's very hard to know what's going to happen politically when we wake up in the morning generally. So I would say I certainly don't worry about tariffs, because one day there are tariffs, the next day there aren't. It's impossible to plan. But I can say that, ultimately, when you get to the point of purchasing, you're going to look across a vast array of options, and you're going to make the most competitive decision.
And obviously this issue has been going on for a while. Michael, you seem like you've had some luck recently with European pension funds. You had funding from Bayerische Vermögenskammer, a German pension fund.
I wouldn't hold you for your German, but yeah.
I'm also wondering about, we're talking about the foreign buyers and foreign money. How about, on the rental side, millennials, and how much of a concern is that you're hearing that they're going to other cities like Nashville and cities where they can be biking outside the city in 5 minutes on a mountain path somewhere?
Well, I'll say that we have a housing crisis in the city. Anything lower than a 5% vacancy rate is a crisis. And even in the depths of the recession, it barely pierced the 3% mark. So you have to work really hard to overbuild the multifamily housing stock in the city. If your units aren't moving, it's because you're greedy. And it's all pricing dislocation. You reduce your price, you fill your buildings. So I don't think we have to worry about amazing second-tier cities like Nashville, Pittsburgh. This is a great thing. This is a flight to urban living. This is the fact that we're a country of cities, as so well said by Vishaan. And the fact is that we should celebrate all of that. So I think the idea that more people are living in cities ever in the history of the world is what we should focus on. And we have the greatest city in the world. So I don't think that they're going to cannibalize our multifamily market. I will say, though, that we do need to figure out our housing crisis, and we need to develop workforce housing as well as low-income housing so that teachers, firemen, police officers all can find a way to live closer to the urban core. So I think we're far away from figuring it out. It has to be figured out because that is also the key to a very strong commercial base in the city, is to make sure that people have places to live.
You know, you're not, again, you're very You're very optimistic. I don't.
Optimistic.
Right, I don't think there's any way that the city as a city is going to figure this out. They've been trying to figure this out year after year after year, and everybody has an idea. At the end of the day, the land is too expensive to build multifamily. You're doing something rare. We'd all wish we could build rentals in New York City. You have a very unique situation because you're doing a land lease. If you had to buy that land, there's no way you could build a rental. You know, I'm sure you'd agree with me. You cannot buy land today in Manhattan, I'm not talking about the outside boroughs, and build a rental. In Brooklyn, you almost can't build
But
land anymore.
condominiums are just allocators of high land costs. So if I have a site and I have scale, and the government gets involved, and half of it wants to be affordable mixed-use housing, all I have to do is tell you that you can build 200 condos, go at it, and I'll give you the subsidy for the affordable housing. The fact is, when you build scale and you can densify a site, you as the city, only the city can do that, create density. By creating density that you otherwise wouldn't have, I can induce you to do something you wouldn't otherwise do. And that's what public policy ought to be doing.
You're right, but they're not doing it. But they're not
No,
doing it,
but
then it's not.
I'm addicted to hope because I'm a developer, and I think that you do have to stay hopeful that policies will start to evolve that allow affordable housing.
We're starting to see it. I mean, we're designing a 2,000-unit all affordable housing project out in East New York for a pastor with Gotham, right? And the city has to do these things. It is a public policy issue, and it is a crisis. If everyone thinks this city is going to be just fine with a bunch of foreign buyers, buying condos, and that the economy of this city is going to work that way, you're all crazy if you think that's going to work, right? This city is made of 8 million people who have to go to work every day. The nurses, the firefighters, the teachers, they have to be able to afford to live here. And I think we have to tackle it from public policy, but I also think we have to look at construction costs. The construction costs are out of control. We're looking at a lot of tall timber construction and seeing if there's savings there, but we have to get it away at getting these costs down so that the basic equation can work again.
Well,
The tall timber point, I just want to say that it's a brilliant idea. And so when government, the mayor, would make a comment against steel and glass, maybe forward-thinking, provocative, made the press. At the same time, if you called the buildings department and you said, I want to build a timber building, what would happen?
They would say, I'm sorry. Now, even though International Building Code, 22 stories you can build, but you can't hear. Interesting why that is.
You can't hear, yeah. So that's the problem, is how does the public policy match the aspiration? And the fact is, it's fine to go out there and say stuff like that, but it's actually irresponsible because the government is not providing the forum and the basis for which we're able to do that as developers. And you're right, we will only do that which we can make money at. Like developers alone will finish everything off. There has to be a partnership in some way between incentivizing developers to do things they otherwise wouldn't do, just like sustainability. I mean, back in the day, a sustainable building in New York in the 90s was recycling in the loading dock. And that's not the case right now, but it's partially because people want to live in buildings that are healthy, and the millennials care about that. And so that's why we're building better buildings, because the market is encouraging, if not compelling us to do that.
Elizabeth Ann, I need to get to this before we open it up to a few questions from the audience, but take us behind the decision to sell to Compass. How did that kind of unfold?
Yeah, I think that, well, the real estate industry on the residential front is changing drastically. I think, Stribling is a 39-year-old company, 12th in size, 4th in volume, residentials, and then 3rd for new development. And it was a wonderful experience working with my mother every day with our agents. But I think more and more there have been pressures on the residential side, especially looking at the aggregators coming in, trying to sell you back your own property leads, and basically looking to try to take as much as they can from the residential arena. And I think we felt the time had come to stand up for our agents and try to step up the plate and take back this industry. Because if we don't do it now, the residential brokerage field will be completely different in 5 years, and I cannot stand by and not try to make a change for my agents. Additionally, there are current laws up for proposal. This has nothing to do with me selling, but I think it's important to note. There are local laws coming up from the City Council trying to cap residential rental brokerage fees. I don't think it's the government's place here in New York to come in and say what my agents can or cannot make. And I just feel there are all these factors coming together. So it really sort of led my mother and I to think, like, how do we stand up and have the best brokerage, but look to the future and see what's happening and work with people who are like us, think progressively, and additionally care about the agent as a whole. And if you had said to you, it's just a huge shock to people, especially some of you may know my mother, Elizabeth Stribling, to imagine that she would have sold to Compass, I think was quite surprising. But when we went in there, we realized this is a firm that cares so deeply about agents like we do in the future of the industry. It was a no-brainer. So it's been a very busy last 6 weeks, but I stand by this decision Libba and I made together. It's the best choice we have ever made, and I think the future's going to be a lot brighter working together.
That's great, and we should sit down and do a video together and talk more about this. Obviously, huge news on the residential front. I want to open it up to a question or two from the audience. Anybody with a question?
Comment on Redfin, Zillow, actively buying homes, flipping them.
So the question was, can you comment on Zillow and Redfin actively buying homes?
I can. I mean, listen, I talk about it every day. That is very scary, and it is very scary to me, and it shows one point, that they are looking to negate the agent. I mean, Redfin saying we're cutting out the buying agent, that 100% to me as a dual agent could lead to a really big dual agency problem. I mean, Zillow, whether it be Zillow, any of these aggregators, Redfin, they're not a nonprofit for brokerage. They're here to make money and do what they can do. And they're not, a lot of people have partnered with them. I think by partnering with them, you're not standing up for the long-term industry. So we as an industry have to think, what can we do to make the leads our own? But I think it's something, when I read that news last week, I was like, oof, this is a scary one.
Another question in the back there?
I'd like to ask Michael Shvo about how's working with Vlad Doronin. About your Osman residences in building. How's working with him?
I know which project that is. So what the gentleman is referring to, so back 3 years ago, we went into contract together with Brookfield to buy the Crown building, which was an interesting project. I'll tell you, you like stories, so I'll tell you the story of how that happened. That's, I think, even more fascinating to answer your story. Crown building came to market. I believe it was East still at the time. And very quickly, Jeff Sutton and GGP, which today is Brookfield, went into contract. They preempted the deal. If I remember correct, Jeff Sutton wired $100 million just to get a meeting with Mr. Spitzer to close this deal, but they signed the contract. And I get a call on a Thursday from my lawyer, said, Sandeep, who's the CEO of GGP, wants to meet you. I said, fantastic, I don't know him, but I'm happy to meet him. So that Friday at 3 o'clock, Sandeep, myself, and my attorney went to GGP's office. We're sitting in the conference room, and the conversation starts like this. He said, I want you to buy the upper floors of the Crown building. I was just out of the blue. I said, okay. He said, I said, why? Well, he said, because, we know that you develop unique product. We think that it would be accretive to the retail. We paid $1.8 billion for this deal. We need to make sense. We need something something that will be complementary to the big retail rents. Those public numbers. I mean, they've made mega rents there on the Bulgari store and some other leases. 3 hours later, a back and forth negotiation. It was a very back envelope kind of due diligence. We knew the building because we've done due diligence when it was on the market. But with $65 rents in the best corner in New York City, I figured it underwrites. We shook hands 3 hours later. I had to get home for Shabbat. It was very important because I shut down my phone at that point. So ended up shaking hands with Sandeep. 5 weeks later, we closed the deal. We closed the $1.8 billion deal in partnership with GGP. So Vlad, who you're referring to, is the owner of Amman. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, you have a building, greatest location in the world. What is it that you do with it? And part of the issue, and nobody can figure out, is these buildings. It's an office building, has huge floor plates, 30,000 square foot floor plates. It doesn't work for a residential building. Nobody can figure out. That's why everybody said it's an office use. Now, if you think about it, what is it that you want to put in the center of the building? I'm thinking to myself, okay, you want to put a spa, right? Because in New York, you want your spa in the most quiet place in the building, as opposed to when you go to Bali, you want it with the great views. I called Vlad, who was just bought the Amman brand at the time. I said, I'm buying the Crown building. Do you want to come in? He texted me. It was all over WhatsApp. He said, are you serious? I said, yes. 2 days later, he came. Shook hands on the deal, and today we're in sales. I think there's the real deal, if you believe what they say, said that we sold the penthouse for $180 million. There are other units that we sold there that have a one handle and substantially more than that. Sales are at very high numbers. The sales office is actually in our office. And the project has been extremely successful, but again, because it goes back to the story that it's a unique product. Amman is a fantastic brand. So that's the story of the purchase of the Crown building.
It's a good inside look at how deal making happens. Last question, really quick. MaryAnne, I want to ask you, your second project you talked about doing, what's a she building?
The She building's an idea. It's a long overdue idea, and won't be my second building because I have my second project, so it'll have to be my third. Unfortunately, in our business, it really doesn't matter what the question is. The answer is always the money. So I have this idea that if the money comes from a female, then everything else will follow. And I believe we can build a building in New York where every bit of it was led by a woman. And we're going to let men live there or work there, but we're going to put it together by women, because if it can happen anywhere, it can happen in New York, and it should have happened already. And by the way, this is not a difficult thing to do. It's just that it hasn't been done yet. So given that I am a developer and I know every single woman I'd call to put this building together, I'm working on the money, and the rest will follow.
Well, if you're back here next May, maybe you'll have some news by then. And I want to thank you all for coming out here today. We're going to get started with our next panel in a little bit.